we had just said, we had just talked about the sixth extinction. And what did we say? We said, who is responsible? Man, humans. Humans are responsible for the sixth extinction. So there's a famous ecologist, E.O. Wilson. He's an ant guy. He studied ant communities. But he's at Harvard. He's a world-renowned ecologist. And he came up with this equation, really. It's not really math involved in it, but he mentally divided it up into what are the human threats to biodiversity, to life. And he came up with this acronym called HIPPO. And each letter in this acronym stands for one of the different threats, human threats to biodiversity. And so we have HIPPO. And so the very first letter is H, and it stands for habitat destruction. Now, habitat destruction is pretty obvious. In Cranberry Township, where a lot of you live, I've talked to people and they say, oh, it never was like this. It's traffic everywhere and shopping malls and so forth, and very beautiful subdivisions. I'm not saying, I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying it was farmland. It was woods and farmland, and it's not that anymore. And that is an obvious change that has happened in the last 20 or 30 years, probably more than 20 years. But anyway, so we have mining, we have deforestation, we have shopping malls, we have fishing practices. There are various types of fishing practices that destroy the habitat. We talked about the Apo Islanders using dynamite to blow up the reef. Well, that pretty much destroys the habitat. So we have that. And then sort of related to that, we have habitat fragmentation. So we're disturbing and destroying habitats, but there are a lot of species that don't live well with people. Wolves, to go back to our example, is an example of a species that's not very tolerant of people. And so if the wide open spaces disappear, so do the wolves. And so habitat fragmentation is one of the sources for reducing biodiversity. I was mentioning a few minutes ago, the boys have to be able to find the girls, and we have something called a minimum viable population. And so that's really what I was referring to a few minutes ago in the previous video, where I was talking about how you can lower down the population to a point where it will not be able to recover. And that's what we talk about with minimum viable population. One of the things that when we look at habitat fragmentations, we can look at there was some classic experiments that were done looking at islands, and it's called island biogeography. And what happened is they looked at islands, and they looked at two different factors. They looked at how big is the island and how far is it from the mainland. And what they found is if you're a small island close to land, or even if you're a big island far from land, so it's harder to have immigrants, species or individuals making their way to the island, you have lower biodiversity. And it's a classic case. And I may have mentioned, or I know I've mentioned, being out at sea many years ago when I was working in oceanography, and a storm 100 miles offshore, and all of these robins and blue jays and things were flying around. They got blown out to sea. And I said they were all destined to die unless they found an island. And so this is how, if you're a small island, it's not easy for those birds to find you. If you're a big island but you're a long ways off, again, it's not easy for them to get there. So you have lower or biodiversity with smaller